Here we have chapter 14, The Wand of Wonderment. Land of Stories. Enchantress returns. The carriage ride back into the Red Riding Hood Kingdom was a difficult trip to make. Witnessing the Enchantress take their grandmother's soul was the most devastating thing the twins had ever seen. Alex cried into her brother's shoulder for most of the trip back to Red's castle. She has Mom, she has Grandma, and soon she'll have the whole fairy tale world, Alex sobbed. She's taken everything from us. Not everything, Alex, Connor said. His was the only reassuring voice in the carriage. We have each other, and we'll figure out a way to get them back. Although they appreciated his optimism, Froggy and Red couldn't help but have doubts. The world had been counting on the fairy godmother for a solution, and now that she was gone, nothing seemed powerful enough to stand against the Enchantress. I'm not sure we can fight this one, Connor, Alex said, with tears spilling out of her eyes. For the first time, I think the bad guy may win this story. The despair grew inside the carriage with every mile they traveled. The twins, Froggy and Red, racked their brains for a solution but couldn't come up with anything. After a day and a half of traveling and worrying, they were very eager to reach Red's castle. That's funny, Red said, looking out the window. I would have expected to be past the wall by now. Froggy and the twins looked out the window too. They were surprised there was no sign of the wall in the distance. It did seem to be taking longer than usual to get back to the Red Riding Hood Kingdom. Wait a minute, Connor said and squinted at something in the distance. Does that say what I think it says? The others looked out the window to what he was referring to. The carriage slowly passed a sign that made their stomachs turn. Bo Peep Family Farms. How is that possible? Red said. Her eyes grew twice in size. The Bo Peep Farms are inside my kingdom. Where was the wall? Froggy and the twins stared out at the rural hills surrounding them, wondering the same thing. A few moments later, they discovered a group of Red Riding Hood soldiers standing at the side of the road. They scratched their heads and looked around in bewilderment, just as confused as they were. Froggy opened the door and poked his head out of the carriage as they passed them. Excuse me, good sirs, what's going on? Where's the wall? There is no wall, sir, one of the soldiers said in disbelief. What do you mean there's no wall? I mean there's no wall anymore, sir, the soldier said. The whole thing disappeared earlier this morning. What? Red gasped. We were guarding the southern entrance when a bright flash came out of nowhere. The next thing we knew, the whole wall was gone. Alex and Connor turned to each other, each thinking the same thing. The Enchantress, Alex said. She started her attacks. Red placed a hand over her chest, trying to calm her beating heart. Even after hearing the Enchantress's warnings firsthand, she'd never thought her home would be targeted. Were there any casualties? Froggy asked. No, sir, just a lot of confusion. Froggy shut the carriage door and sank into his seat across from the twins. So it begins, he said sadly to himself. It was dusk by the time the carriages approached Red's castle. They felt so exposed without the wall. As they had looked around the town, it was apparent the villagers felt the same. Everywhere they looked, wooden boards were nailed over doors and windows of the homes and shops of the residents, as if they were preparing for a storm. I haven't seen people this frightened since the big bad wolf was around. It reminds me of the days of the crawl revolution. Froggy took Red's hand in his. Her mind was too preoccupied to notice its cold, slimy texture. Esmea could have done much worse, Froggy said. Thankfully, it was just the wall. His words had the opposite effect of what he intended. Red pulled her hand out from his, and her eyes became watery. It's not just a wall, Red yelled. That wall is what separates us from the rest of the world. It represents our safety and victory after years of struggling. The big bad wolf and his succeeding pack may be gone, but that wall has always been a symbol of peace to my people. Red wiped away the tears that had escaped, embarrassed by her outburst. As soon as we get back to my castle, I'm going to order a line of soldiers to surround the town at once. We may not have a wall, but we will be protected. Froggy and the twins nodded along with her. The twins liked seeing Red give an official and selfless order as queen. Maybe Froggy had been right about her. Maybe there was much more to Red than they had ever considered. They eventually reached the castle, and as soon as Red gave her orders, the four of them headed into the library for a much-needed quiet and recuperative evening. But as they walked in, they were shocked to discover a surprise visitor who had been awaiting their arrival. Jack! Red yelled. The infamous Jack of Beanstalk fame was nonchalantly sitting in one of the armchairs. He was tall and handsome, with broad shoulders, exactly how the twins remembered him. He wore suspenders, and his trusty axe hung from his belt. "Hello, Red," Jack said, and stood to greet the group. Red went pale and stiff as a statue. What are you doing here?" "Visiting, obviously," he said with a smile. The young queen could only make a couple high-pitched squeals as she attempted to form another question. Froggy's eyes went back and forth between Red and Jack. He couldn't decide if the surprise was good or bad. "Well, this is unexpected," Froggy said. Jack's face lit up when he saw the twins. "I remember you two," he said. "Hi, Jack," Alex said. "Hey, man," Connor said. Despite everything else in their minds, the twins were glad to see him. Red grew anxious quickly, and she began looking around the library. "Wait, Jack, if you're here, that means—" Slam! The library door shut with gusto. They all turned to see Goldilocks standing behind them. "You!" Red said and pointed at her. She quickly backed away from her old nemesis. "Hello, Red," Goldilocks said with a fake smile. She wore tall leather boots and a long maroon knitted sweater. A silver sword swung from her side. She had golden curls and was just as beautiful as the last time the twins had seen her. There was something different about Goldilocks and Jack that the twins noticed. They both looked much happier now that they were on the run together. "Goldilocks!" Alex said, and she and her brother ran to give Goldilocks a hug. "What a wonderful surprise," Goldilocks said, and a proud smirk appeared on her face. "I would say, it's nice to see you again, children, but you're hardly children anymore." Connor nodded. "Thank you. That's what we've been trying to tell everyone." Goldilocks playfully rubbed his head. "I had at least 4 warrants for my arrest by the time I was your age," she said, and then winked at Jack. Jack smiled. "I'm a late-blooming bandit myself, but I'm catching up." They lovingly stared at each other as if no one else were in the room. "You!" Red said, still pointing at Goldilocks. She looked like a teapot whose spout had been corked. "Oh, relax, Red," Goldilocks said. "We aren't here to cause any trouble. I'm not going to hurt you." Red snorted. You bet your porridge-loving, indecisive behind you won't be harming me. This is my castle." She said, "You're both wanted fugitives. How'd you get inside?" "We used the front door," Jack said. "They let us in without any trouble. I grew up with most of the guards, remember?" Red looked back and forth between Jack and Goldilocks, not wanting to believe the statement was true. It was frustrating to feel so disrespected in her own home. "Does the word queen mean anything to anyone?" Red shouted. Shouldn't my safety be the priority in my castle?" Froggy decided to break the tension. "Forgive us. We weren't expecting company. We've had a rough few days. Why don't we have a seat and catch up?" No one argued. Everyone took a seat around the big bad wolf floor rug. It took a minute for Red to gather her thoughts and join them. She sat next to Froggy but left a noticeable space between them. Jack and Goldilocks sat across from them, sitting so close they looked like they were joined at the hip. Alex and Connor shared an armchair adjacent to the couples. "You just returned from the happily ever after assembly meeting, I take it?" Goldilocks asked. "Indeed," Red said with her nose raised slightly, "because that's what we law-abiding rulers do. We meet publicly and discuss things that benefit the greater good." Her words did not affect Goldilocks in the slightest. "Where's the fun in that?" Goldilocks said. "How'd it go?" Jack asked. "It was awful," Connor said. "The Enchantress showed up, kidnapped our grandmother. She already has our mom." Jack and Goldilocks looked to each other with the same inquisitive expression. "What could she want with your mother and grandmother?" Goldilocks asked. Connor and Alex had forgotten. Jack and Goldilocks had made a run for it before they discovered who their grandmother was. "Our grandmother is the fairy godmother," Alex said, with a shrug that said, "Surprise." Jack and Goldilocks looked rather impressed. "Well, how about that?" The twins told them all about how they were from another world and their grandmother had traveled back and forth for centuries, sharing the stories of the fairy tale world with theirs. Once Jack and Goldilocks had processed the information, the twins continued to tell them how their father had used the wishing spell to be reunited with their mother in the other world. And they discovered the fairy tale world by traveling through their grandmother's old storybook. Yes, yes, yes. It was very touching, Red said, waving her hands. They've learned the fairy godmother was their grandmother. Then all three of them disappeared through a door that led into a different world, blah, blah, blah. You still haven't told me what you two are doing in my castle. The twins could tell Jack and Goldilocks were interested in hearing more of the story, but they knew they'd better appease Red before her head exploded. We wanted to see if any progress had been made with the Enchantress, Jack said. Nope, there hasn't been any. Sorry, you can both leave now, Red said. Froggy placed his hand on her knee. Darling, let's not be rude. They may be emotionally distressing wanted fugitives, but they're still our guests. The twins were eager to tell Jack and Goldilocks about the meeting from the previous night and didn't wait for Froggy or Red to get to it. They told them all about Princess Hope being kidnapped and how the Enchantress had taken their grandmother and was starting to attack the kingdoms. And there's nothing that can be done to stop her? Jack said, shaking his head in the same disbelief the twins felt. Unfortunately not. I don't know how the situation concerns the two of you, Red said, crossing her arms. This affects us too, Goldilocks said. We don't want to live in a world ruled by her either. We thought we could help. Help? Red said and laughed at the idea. And what are you going to do, Goldilocks? Steal her jewels, pick her locks, test all the furniture until it's just right? Goldilocks stood and glared down at Red. It made the queen squirm in her seat. She looked to the others for help, but she was on her own. Is there something you want to say to my face, Grandma's girl? No, I'd much rather say it behind your back, Red said. I thought after helping me escape you had changed, Goldilocks said, but apparently I was wrong. Well, I thought helping you would make me feel better, but I suppose I was wrong too, Red admitted, and sheepishly glanced over at Jack. Froggy raised his green index finger. Moving back to more important matters, he said, the fairies and monarchs don't have any clue what to do. The fairy godmother has always been able to just wave her wand and make things better, but unfortunately she can't this time. So now we're all waiting for a solution to arise, if there is one. The twins nodded. Goldilocks sat back down next to Jack, held his hand. The room was reunited with the hopelessness they had tried leaving in the carriage. Suddenly, Connor cocked his head like a puppy. Froggy, what did you just say? I said no one knows what to do. Not sure how he could have made that clearer. No, before that, what'd you say about the fairy godmother? Froggy looked at him peculiarly, wondering why he wanted the horrible news to be repeated. I said the fairy godmother usually just waves her wand and makes everything better. Bingo! Connor said, and immediately jumped out of the armchair and ran toward the bookshelf. Connor, what's gotten into you? Hey, Froggy, Connor asked, completely in his own world. Where's that book you were looking for the other day? The one that had the chapter about the wishing spell. It took a moment for Froggy to remember. Myths, legends, and collecting spells? He asked. It should be on the shelf 2, over and 1 below the books from your sister. I'm very specific about where my books are kept. Connor scanned the shelves until he found it. Gotcha, he said with a satisfied jump. He sat back down next to his sister and flipped through the pages. I think the answer we're looking for is in this book. Are you talking about using the wishing spell again? Froggy asked. Could we use it on the Enchantress? Jack asked. Trust me, wishing someone away never works, Red said and raised an eyebrow in Goldilocks' direction. Goldilocks placed a hand on her sword as a warning. We couldn't use the wishing spell even if we wanted to. The spell could only be used twice, and the evil queen was the second person to use it. I'm not talking about the wishing spell, Connor said, his eyes still glued to the pages that he was searching. I'm thinking about something even bigger and better, and found it. Connor turned the book around to the section he was referring to. The Wand of Wonderment. The Wand of Wonderment? The room read together. Connor nodded enthusiastically, expecting them to all share his excitement. Unfortunately, everyone else just exchanged pitying looks with one another. Why are you all looking at me like I want to take my pet rock for a walk? Connor asked. This book says that whoever holds the Wand of Wonderment is invincible. Whoever gets their hands on it could potentially stop the Enchantress. Froggy looked at him regretfully. That isn't real, Connor. This is just a childish legend like all the other subjects in that book. Okay, says the giant talking frog, Connor said with an eye roll. This book talks about the wishing spell too, and we've proven that wasn't just a myth. I bet most of the stuff in this book is real too. The Wand of Wonderment, he read aloud from the book. Many believe that possessing the Wand of Wonderment gives the beholder the gift of invincibility. It is said that the wand is formed when combining the 6 most prized possessions of the 6 most hated people in the world. Although the idea is dubious, the legend of the wand may have some truth to it, considering the materials needed are most likely of a magic background. Unlike most collections, the materials required for making the Wand of Wonderment may change with the times. Connor took a breath and looked up at the others, who still looked ambivalent. "Oh, come on," Connor said to the stubborn group. "You've got to admit that it doesn't seem like too much of a stretch." Everyone was on the fence about it. Connor was frustrated they weren't as convinced as he was. "My sister and I are from another dimension," he said, and then pointed to Froggy. "This guy has been magically transformed into a giant amphibian twice. What part about the Wand of Wonderment is hard for any of you to believe?" Connor made a valid point. What about this wand was so hard for them to believe after all the other things they had witnessed? At least it was an option, and an option gave them hope. Alex silently stared at the book with a growing eagerness in her eyes. "Just out of curiosity's sake," Alex said, "who are the 6 most hated people in this world?" Red looked up at Goldilocks and opened her mouth to answer. "By the world, Red, not by you," Alex clarified. "I'd say the Evil Queen is a candidate," Froggy said. "The giant," Jack said, "and I'm not speaking from personal experience. People were terrified of him." "The Snow Queen," Goldilocks mentioned. "Her historic reign over the Northern Kingdom still sends shivers down people's spines." Connor was all ears, making mental notes of their suggestions. "Who else?" "You know, I've personally never cared for Miss Muffet," Red said, as she was confessing a horrid secret. "I mean, it was just a spider. Get over it." Everyone in the room stared at Red for a moment and then went on with their brainstorming. What about the sea witch who traded with the Little Mermaid? I was always scared of her as a kid." "Oh yeah, I bet all the fish in the sea are afraid of her," Connor said. Froggy sat straight up as another idea came to him. "Cinderella's wicked stepmother," he said. "The whole charming kingdom despises her." "This is great," Connor said. "So far we have the Evil Queen, the Giant, the Snow Queen, the Sea Witch, and the wicked stepmother. We just need one more." They all went silent and their eyes wandered around the room. "Well, isn't it obvious?" Red said. "It's the Enchantress." Lumps grew in everyone's throats. Red was right. "Well, the Wand of Wonderment was a good idea," Goldilocks said, as if it were obvious it were no longer possible. Everyone slumped in their seats, but Connor wouldn't accept defeat. "What's wrong with you guys? We can't let confronting Esmea get in the way. This may be our only chance at stopping her." He desperately looked at everyone in the room, hoping for someone to agree with him, but no one said anything. Connor leaped to his feet, deciding actions would have to speak louder than words if he wanted to get through to them. He walked around the room, collecting random books off the shelves. "What are you doing?" Alex asked. He didn't respond. He took a portrait of Red off the wall and added a couple candlesticks to his pile. He walked to the fireplace and promptly dumped everything into the fire. "Connor!" Red said. Those are mine. Have you gone mad?" Connor stood in front of the fireplace with his hands on his hips. The fire slowly consumed the pile of stuff behind him. "You won't need them anymore," he said. "Don't you get it? If we just sit around and wait, the Enchantress is going to take over. Everything we love will be gone." Alex wanted to share her brother's passion, but she couldn't get her head past the odds. "Connor, it's just too dangerous. It's practically a death wish." Her lack of faith was about to make Connor jump out of his skin. "Doing nothing is a death wish. If building this Wand of Wonderment thing offers us a chance at saving the world, we'd be idiots not to try it." Connor was practically in tears, trying to convince them. Everyone looked back and forth between him and the objects burning in the fireplace. A decision had to be made. However, one thing was certain. Whatever they did, they risked losing it all. Froggy stood up abruptly. "I agree with Connor. We know the outcome of doing nothing, so I'd rather die fighting." Froggy's words had a rallying effect. "I've never been good at just sitting around," Goldilocks said, standing with Froggy. "Besides, you'll need someone who's good with a sword out there." Jack stood next to Goldilocks. "If the Enchantress thinks she's taking over without a fight, she's mistaken." Their determination made Alex's heart skip a beat. This is a really big decision to make. Once we make it, there's no looking back. We can't give up. The stakes are too high." We won't be able to do it unless we agree on that. No matter what, we can't give up. Froggy looked to Jack, Jack looked to Goldilocks, and Goldilocks looked to Connor. The same confident smile appeared on their faces. I'm up for the challenge, Connor said. Alex nodded too. Then count me in, as she smiled. Me too, Red exclaimed, the last to stand. I have no additional point to make, but I support this venture completely. No one takes my wall away from me and gets away with it. Connor went to a desk in the corner of the library and quickly retrieved a piece of parchment and a quill. Let's make a list of things we'll need to make the Wand of Wonderment, he said. We've narrowed it down to the 6 most hated people in the world. Now, what are those people's most prized possessions? Everyone sat down and began planning out the expedition. Everyone knows the Snow Queen's scepter is her most prized possession. It's where her magic comes from. Snow Queen, magic scepter. Connor said and wrote the information down. I imagine the wicked stepmother's most valuable possession has something to do with her family. An heirloom, Froggy proposed. She won't be hard to get to. She still lives in the same house Queen Cinderella grew up in. Wicked stepmother, family heirloom, Connor said, made a note of it. The giant's favorite item shouldn't be difficult to figure out, Jack said. There weren't many things in his castle when I traveled there as a boy. It's difficult finding material things that size. Giant, to be determined, Connor said. The evil queen's would have to be her magic mirror. Think about all she went through to free that creepy bald man from it. Evil queen, magic mirror, Connor said. And just when I thought our evil queen days were behind us. It's in pieces at the bottom of castle ruins, but it shouldn't be hard to retrieve, Alex said. What about the sea witch? What could she not live without? Her jewels, Goldilocks said. It's what she collects in exchange for favors, unless she bargains for something greater. Sea witch, loves her bling, Connor said and scribbled it down. All we have left is the Enchantress, Alex said, and the room unanimously took a deep breath. What is Esmia's most prized possession? Everyone drew a blank. They all knew the Enchantress loved power, but how would that manifest as an object? We'll have to come back to it. I'll put a question mark by her name for now. Goldilocks looked over his shoulder at the list they'd compiled. These people live far and wide across the kingdoms. How are we going to get around? Jack looked over the list too. Not to mention a group of travelers would look awfully suspicious at a time like this. And we'll need to travel fast too, Alex said. The Enchantress said herself, she's grown impatient. The room was filled with a low humming sound as Froggy thought on it. We'll need something to travel in quickly and discreetly across the land. Let me propose we forget about traveling on land and suggest we travel above it. Froggy hopped to one side of the library and returned with a book. Alex recognized the title and instantly knew what Froggy was getting at. We'll travel by balloon, Froggy said excitedly, just like the travelers did in Around the World in 80 Days. I have to admit, I've been waiting for a situation to arise that offered an excuse to build something like this. Froggy, that's very ambitious, Alex said. But it just might work, Connor said. The Enchantress isn't going to be expecting people in the sky. This world is centuries away from aviation. Precisely, Froggy said, and as he flipped through the book. He quickly grabbed the quill out of Connor's hand and began sketching something on the back of their list. Now, in the story where there were only 3 travelers, so all they needed was a large basket to travel in. But I propose we go even further. We need something to glide across the sky and sail across the sea. So let's build a ship. Froggy finished his drawing and showed it to the room. His proposal was a modest boat-shaped vessel with sails on the sides of a large balloon above it. Can we build something that extravagant in time? Goldilocks asked. Jack took the sketch and examined it, rubbing the side of his head. It's not the construction I'm worried about. It's the amount of supplies needed to build it. The twins remembered he was a very talented carpenter, so they took his words to heart. Red took a closer look at the drawing. Exactly what kind of supplies would be needed? She asked with a raised eyebrow. Froggy looked down at the drawing. Lumber, very sturdy fabric, and a lot of lamp oil. Red squinted and quietly nodded, counting things off in her head. Yep, I have all those things here in the castle, she said with a big smile. Everyone did a double take. Where? We can weave the ship out of the wood from my basket collection, Red said. I think my collection of summer dresses would provide enough fabric for the balloon and sails. They were made with the finest fabric in the kingdom. As for the lamp oil, they keep barrels and barrels of it in the castle just to warm the water for my baths. I take a lot of baths. Didn't you lose all your baskets in the fire? Most of them, Red said, but I've had plenty of birthdays and holidays since then. My collection is practically complete again. The twins couldn't argue. If the dress Red had worn to the happily ever after assembly meeting was any indication, the Queen definitely had enough supplies to go around. I think it may work, Jack said. I can have some better plans drawn up by tomorrow morning. Red, can you send for the best builders in the kingdom? We'll need as many as we can get. Absolutely, she said. The third little pig happens to be one of the best builders in the kingdom, and he actually owes me a favor. He accidentally built part of his brick house on Bo Peep property, and I pardoned him. How long will it take to build? 4 or 5 days if we work diligently, Jack said. 3 days if we work around the clock. Terrific, Froggy said. It's really a great idea, Froggy, Connor said. Froggy smiled. I think so, too. It'll make traveling a lot easier, not having to trek through the northern mountains to the Snow Queen or up a beanstalk to the giant's castle. Jack cleared his throat. Unfortunately, we'll still need to climb that beanstalk, he said. Why? That beanstalk is what summons the giant's castle, Jack said. It won't appear unless the beanstalk grows to a certain height. Connor scrunched his forehead. Where is the beanstalk, anyway? I don't think we've seen it since we've been here. Red went silent and stared at the floor. Red, did you do something with Jack's beanstalk? Goldilocks asked. Red looked around the room with guilty eyes. I may have had it removed, she confessed. Removed? Why would you do that? Because it was an eyesore, Red said defensively. Besides, it was hard waking up every day and having that staring down at me. You know, after all of this, she gestured to herself, Jack, and Goldilocks. Oh, great, Goldilocks said. Now what are we going to do? Jack sighed. I'll have to find the traveling tradesman again. Hopefully he'll have more magic beans or know where to get them. I'll leave as soon as I get the builders set up tomorrow. Then it's settled, Froggy said with a clap. The 5 of us will leave as soon as the ship is ready. Red looked at him sideways. What do you mean, 5 of you? Goldilocks' mouth fell open. Don't tell me you were planning on coming, she said. Of course I'm coming, Red said. I'm supplying everything, aren't I? With all due respect, Red, Connor said, this trip may not be suitable for a queen. Excuse me? Red said, horribly offended. If memory serves me right, the last time we were all together, I had been kidnapped twice, thrown into a pit of demonic plants, and almost mauled to death in the same day. Are you telling me my life can only be in danger when it's convenient for you? Red crossed her arms even tighter and looked away from the others. There was no changing her mind. Darling, Froggy asked, do you think that's the best idea, given the history of everyone traveling? I'm coming, she declared. I'm not sitting around here and letting the 5 of you take credit for saving the world without me. I should start packing immediately. I've never packed for an adventure before. Red giddily got to her feet and ran out of the library. The others shot Froggy a dirty look. I'm going to go talk to her and explain the situation a bit more. Jack went to the desk and began outlining better plans for the ship. Goldilocks stayed with the twins by the fire. A proud smile came to her face as she looked at them. What is it? Alex asked. Nothing, Goldilocks said. I just recall a time when I told the 2 of you to be brave, and now look who's doing the convincing. Alex and Connor exchanged a smile. They had grown a lot since their last trip. I should feed Porridge, Goldilocks said. I had to put her in the castle stables, and she's never gotten along well with the other horses. Goldilocks left the library, gently tapping the twins on their shoulders on her way out. It grew very quiet, except for the flames flickering in the fireplace and the strokes of Jack's quill as he worked on the ship's designs. You almost lost me there, Alex told her brother. I felt so defeated. Thanks for pulling me back. Anytime. Thanks for helping me cheat on my test in 6th grade. Alex let out a noise that was half gasp and half laugh. How'd you know about that? She asked. Connor looked at her. The only C or B that belonged on my tests were my initials, he said. Alex laughed for the first time in 2 days. She missed the times when passing tests was her biggest concern. Are you sure you're up for this? Connor thought about it. You mean another dangerous adventure through a fairy tale world collecting various items with potential life or death stakes? He said with a grin. Alex snickered. Yes, that's what I'm referring to. Connor thought about it for a moment and then nodded to himself. Bring it on.